Okay, today we're going to talk about Gate 55, the Gate of Abundance. And before we get started, does anyone want to share anything about their experience so far? Transit experience.
Well, I can't say transit experience, but I have my design moon in 55.3. So I'm very excited to see what will come through today.
Cool. Yeah. Nice. Anyone else?
I'm
Anyone?
not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly that I'm tracking it. And this morning or today, I feel like more of a calmness. Um, like I'm giving myself space for pauses,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe a little bit more grace for those I'm engaged with. But it feels a little chicken and eggy because I'm like, ooh, we're in 55, so that means something different. So I'm not sure if I'm tracking that mentally or energetically.
Yeah. I'm not really sure that any of the language you used really particularly struck me as 55, but maybe what you're pointing at is a 55 experience. We all use language in different ways, obviously. So maybe it'll become more clear by the end of class. Okay, well, let's dive in. As always, we start with the Godhead Kali, which this is the last gate of this quarter of the first quarter, right? That Kali is really the ruler of, the young Godhead of transformation, change that requires death and resurrection. So where does that transformative process apply to Gate 55? So there are really a lot of different expressions of that Kali death and resurrection experience here. First, I would say, bear in mind that Gate 55 is part of the Sleeping Phoenix cross, right? Which very much, it's right there in the name, it has to do with resurrection from the ashes. And the 55 is being reborn, so to speak, as it's mutating the solar plexus, right? The mutation is really occurring in that gate. Right? But in a more mundane sense, you could say that your spirit can be renewed, right, with the perspective on whether the glass is half empty or full, right? And it can also be renewed with the capacity to be with the melancholy in a non-reactive way, right? To not defend yourself from it, to not numb it, to instead embrace it, not to indulge in it, but to simply feel it without investing in the accompanying mental stories, right? And if anything, to help yourself feel what needs to be felt, with music or poetry or art or film or whatever that resonates with what you're feeling, right? That resonating experience can help the emotion clear, right? And the mood shift. So embodiment of the feeling is inherently transformative. The right music, art, and poetry can be transformative. The creative act can be transformative. And perspective itself is transformative. So as I said, this is where the mutation is taking place, that's transforming the solar plexus into our third true awareness center, right? Spirit awareness, right? And the term spirit in the human design context isn't metaphysical, right? It's not metaphysical. Think of it more like team spirit or school spirit or holiday spirit, right? 55s are either enthusiastically high-spirited about something, or conversely, they can be Grinches. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Larry David, the comedian, co-creator of Seinfeld. He's had this, comedy show on HBO for about 20 years. It's actually ending in the next month or so. Show called Curb Your Enthusiasm. And I had speculated that he probably had Gate 55, And sure enough, he actually has the whole channel of emoting. I looked recently. And, that show, he really plays someone who's on the low, grinchy end of the 55. Conversely, I've known children with the 55 who were just really more excited than usual about any upcoming holiday. Obviously kids are all excited about Christmas and what they think they're going to get and all that stuff, but like just anything. It could be National Gum Chewing Day. And they're like, wow, gum chewing day. What are you doing gum chewing day? They're just want to find a reason, to tap into the spirit. Right. So I've seen both extremes, or even cheerleaders. I've seen cheerleaders who have, this gate in some significant placement, like in their incarnation cross, something like that. Again, that's the team spirit, right? And you find the spirit with others. And that's one of the big themes we're going to be looking at today. So what's important to see is that it's either full of spirit and almost has this like effervescent, overflowing, emotional, energetic display of that, or it's in the darkest of all places, and unsure, right? Very unsure if it will ever find happiness again. 55 is always unsure, right? And so whatever it's dealing with, it can bring that indecisiveness. But this is the most volatile of all of the emotional gates, right? It has the highest wave going up and the lowest wave going down, right? And obviously when the wave is up, the glass looks half full. And when the wave is down, it looks half empty, right? And empty is a significant word here. That's really the term that could probably best describe the internal experience between pulses, right? Remember, the mood shifts in a pulse, right? And that pulse happens in its own timing, right? So it can feel like an eternity to the person in the melancholy, right? Unsure if happiness will come again, right? So they can really be dramatic in those periods. I'll never be happy again. Well, this is never, these kind of strong, always, never, So those are the vulnerable times when 55 can try to fill its spirit with food or with substance, right? Whereas the healthiest thing to do is take what I would call a homeopathic approach, meaning the approach of like cures like, right? And to turn on sad music or a sad movie or, a sad poem, anything that matches the emotion, right? And even the thoughts showing up in relation to the emotion, right? Because through that resonance, there can be catharsis and something can shift, right? But as always, when it comes to our internal experience, it's never about trying to change it, right? Because the mind doesn't know how long we need that internal experience, right? Or what it should change to, right? But we can know how to be with the process, how to help it along while still honoring its own timing and space. So you just want to kind of see that you're not the manager of the process, right? But you can be a facilitator in addition to a surrendered participant in it. So let's look at the context gate 55 is situated in, right? So it's part of the knowing circuit, or what we could also call the not knowing circuit, right? Because the knowing circuit happens in a pulse, as we've said, in its own timing. And between the pulses, individuals can suffer, right? They can suffer from a lack of creative inspiration, or they can suffer from the banality of life, another day, same old shit, right? Or they suffer from indecisiveness itself. Individuals are often vacillating between saying they know or they don't know, right? And this is a love gate. Be like, I love you. I don't know if I love you. Their partner says, do you love me? And they say, I don't know. Why don't you know? How don't you know? We've been together for a year now. You don't know? So they really struggle with that indecisiveness. And they suffer really in that experience because they think they should know when they don't know. Right? They make not knowing into a problem. Right? Just as much as they make not feeling inspired or creative a problem. Right? They don't know how to honor the value of the gaps between the pulses. Right? They don't know how to value the fallow period. They feel empty without the knowing or without the creative energy. Right? But the fallow period is a necessary part of the process, right? Of creativity, of mutation, right? And of unique, empowering knowing. And to truly be empowered, which is the knowing circuit keynote here, individuals need to learn to not lose their power in these fallow periods, right? To not fret over the length of the fallow period, to not think they're supposed to know something that's unknowable or to know something before it's time. They have to trust that ripening process. Right? I mean, just because you can't see something's happening doesn't mean nothing's happening, right? It's behind the scenes. And empowerment also requires the right relationship to the melancholic chemistry that's in the circuit, right? To find beauty in the sadness, to find creative potential in the sadness, to learn that you can work with it and transmute it into something meaningful and purposeful. Again, as I said, not as a manager who's the ultimate decider, but as a facilitator and a surrendered participant in the process. Now, the awareness potential here is the awareness of provocation or not. Am I being provoked? Do I like it? Do I like it when this person provokes me? Do I feel empowered by that provocation? Right? And of course, 55 has to honor its moods about when's the right time to eat, make love, work, be social, etc. However, moods are not actually applicable to everything, right? As we'll talk about in a moment when we look at the channel, right? Meaning, yes, if you have 55, you're going to honor those moods, but realize some decisions in life are not to be informed by mood. Mood is just not the means to work with them, right? We'll come back to that. So questions about gate 55. Any questions? Okay. So let's look at the channel of emoting, a design of moodiness, right? The 3955. So this is the channel of fluctuating emotions and moods. It's passionate and romantic, right? And it contains this deeply creative potential, right? And it's all about the expression of the emotional spirit, right? This ability to delve into the deep recesses of your own being to find spirit awareness. And people with this channel know how to provoke others to tease out their spirit, right? That teasing in the 39 and the provocations in the 39 can bring out the truth in others. 3955s can see what the other person's made of. They can see their true self at an emotional level. But bear in mind, this can be very intense. It can be a very raw, intense experience for the other person. Potentially they can open others up with the provocations and release something new in them. Something that might even really change them. It can be mutative. So they gradually learn to recognize the nature of others' spirit, and who has the right spirit for them. And they can learn over time to provoke in a way that brings about pleasure instead of pain, right? Happiness instead of sadness. It's ultimately about not just filtering for who are my people, but empowering others with the provocation, right? Sometimes people really need to be shaken. They need to be provoked in order to really get in touch with their power, right? To get in touch with their spirit, to really see what they're made of. However, when provoking incorrectly with the wrong people, right, the consequences can be very disempowering. It can really crush someone's spirit. So the 3955, their true spirit is an emotional state. That's their truth. And they'll know who their allies are by who can accept their moodiness and the timing of when they do certain things based on their moods. Right? And they need to recognize that their emotional ups and downs are usually just a chemistry, right? However, right, as a very important side point here, sometimes the emotions are informative, right? That something isn't correct in your life, right? And they need to be investigated as such, right? Client shows up, they have gate 55, they're dealing with a lot of depression, this, that, it's not enough to just say, well, you've got gate 55, right? There can be a conversation that untangles, right, how that person might be not honoring their truth, not living correctly, and then contributing, to that depression, right? So where they're at emotionally can be indicative of an imbalance that warrants exploration, right? Rather than automatically dismissed merely as chemistry, right? That has its own internal cause and has no relationship to anything or anyone outside. It's not really accurate, right? And it can be a bypass in the HD community. And I think it's a bypass that really stems from Ra, right? So yes, absolutely. There is just chemistry, right? That is true. And it can be indicative of something that's off in the person's life that warrants exploration. So let's put a bookmark in that point, right? And please ask questions when we come to a break, if you'd like to discuss further. But ultimately, emotions are to be experienced, right? It's only by being with them that they can fully process and complete. And by consciously being with them, we have a certain degree of freedom from, right? And again, on this mundane level, as is the case with just having gate 55, people with the whole channel, they do need to honor their mood. As Ra has said numerous times, when you love, when you eat, when you work, when you play, it's about the moods, right? Having said that, not everything is dictated by mood, right? Marriage isn't a mood. Buying a home isn't a mood, right? Building a business isn't a mood, right? So yes, there are moods to be honored, and yet there's something else in the decision-making process that informs, right, these bigger commitments that transcend the scope of mood, right? Mood doesn't apply to those, right? Because mood is shorter lived than that, right? So just another little bit of heresy to take note of. Other kind of interesting things about this channel tends to, it's a channel of great actors and actresses, right? So especially if you have an undefined G, right? And then you've got this channel, that can be a really powerful combination, right? And their voice, the 3955 voice, can be sing-songy or kind of whiny. Same with the 1222, the whole stream, right? And it really says something that the throat gates are not the end-all be-all of what we're communicating about or how we sound, right? That's myopic, right? Okay, questions about the channel of emoting. Or about moods and their scope and emotional chemistry and yeah, what it can indicate.
Yes, I had a question. So that was really interesting how you were saying the channel of emoting, these people are really good at provoking other people into their own emotional spirit, which can not always be a pleasant experience for them. So it's like they bring this crucible for people to get in touch with that. So I was wondering, since it's in the aura, is it similar with other channels to bring that out in other people, or is it more intensified in this channel because of the provocation and mutation component of the circuitry?
Yeah, so just to kind of restate my understanding of your question, you're asking basically, I think, if you're emotionally defined by any of the other emotional channels, does that have the capacity to kind of help people get in touch? Do those other channels have the capacity to help people get in touch with their emotional truth as much as this one? Is that the question?
Well, no, it was more like in the theme of each channel and not even just emotional channels, I suppose. And as I'm asking the question, I'm sort of seeing that obviously the answer is yes, but it's just, I suppose it's just a way that I never fully thought of it. Like, the channel of talent, to bring out, to help other people, for example, get in touch with, well, that's maybe not a good example because it's over time, but um the maybe 35-36 to help people get in touch with saying yes to life's experiences a little bit more, or doing it for the sake of the experience rather.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. There's kind of a lot we could say about that. So how I hear your question is really, when you have definition, are you guiding, educating, empowering people from the wisdom of your definition, we might say, right? Is that part of where you're going with this? Is that a fair?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And unlocking that particular aspect in them.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is actually something that I clarified in the analyst training in the second semester, because there was a really popular post going around on Instagram about projectors guiding from their definition rather than the openness. And so what it is you're guiding from the definition, right? But it's really about the openness, right? So in other words, if you have a projector who, I don't know, it could be any type of projector, right? Let's just say that it's a 4323, mental projector, right? So obviously they're going to be reading the generator's energy, right? And they can really tap into their identity, because that's where the aura goes into the monopole, right? Into the G. And they have wisdom about all of these open centers, but the way that they're going to work with that generator is by potentially empowering them, right? With really unique insights, potentially, right? So that becomes the way that it's done, right? But their expertise, so to speak, the how is in the definition. That's how they do it, right? But the what are they looking at? What is the expertise? What is the wisdom? That's in the openness. What are they wise about? How the generator uses their energy. How are they going to work with that generator in an individualistic, empowering way, through unique insights, structuring a different way to, see things, different perspectives. Does that make sense? How the definition is the how, right? And more of the filter, and then the subject itself is in the openness. Is that clear?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a very important point. Yeah. Okay, cool. Shango says 100%. Great. Okay, anyone else question about the channel before we move on? Okay. Okay, so the polarity of 55 is 59. right? And gate 55 is a love gate, right? This gate of eternally indecisiveness about love. It's this gate of fickleness, right? And 59 is a sexual role gate, right? So these are two very powerful gates that produce a really interesting creative tension, right? And remember, creative tension is always the dynamic with polarity gates, right? That's what it's really about. You know, these are oppositions astrologically. And 55 is looking to fill its spirit with romantic sexual union, right? It's romantic. The sexual union's obviously the 59, right? So that's how these two can work together. And consider how sex can be used to fill our spirit, you know, like a drug. And of course, there is a time for sex to fill our spirit, but it won't really fill our spirit if we expect it to do that for us. You know, you can't strategically approach the sex act with that goal. You know, it's going to fill your spirit when the stars align for that. You know, sometimes sex is just sex, it's just physical, it's animal, you know, and sometimes it's transcendent and emotional. And that's what 55 wants. It wants something more than the carnal aspect of sex, right? But yeah, it can use sex as an escape from its melancholy. That's more the dysfunctional side, right, of how these gates would work together. And it can find spirit through the right unions when it's time for that. And I would say another higher creative potential here is breaking down the barriers, right? Gate 59, breaking down the barriers with others to find the spirit. And that doesn't necessarily have to happen in a sexual context, right? Because ultimately, gate 55 knows that the spirit is with others, right? Even though it's individual, it knows it's with others. And it knows that because it's a part of the cross of spirit we're going to look at shortly, right? And that cross of spirit is actually connected to the channel of community, right? It's connected because gate 55, line 6, and gate 59, line 6, right? As all 6 lines, they're looking at the next gates in the wheel, right? That's what 6 lines do. They're not really part of the hexagram that they're in. They're looking at that next gate in the wheel, what's to come, looking over the horizon, right? And the next gates in the wheel happen to be gate 37 and gate 40, respectively, right? So where do we replenish our spirit? You know, ask the 6th line on that cross, you know, with 59 and 55 in that cross. And the answer is in community. The answer is with others, right? So again, I see the highest expression, you know, of this creative pairing as really breaking down the barriers with others to find the spirit. So here's the mirror, gate 28, both love gates. Again, 55 is the internally indecisive love, extremely fickle and moody about love, right? And 28 is looking for a purpose beyond mere splenic survival, right? There's got to be more to life than just surviving, you know? And one way it pursues purpose is by taking risks, right? It's the gate of the game player. And it knows that purpose is sometimes a struggle, but the ends justify the means, right? And a life of purposeful struggle is better than a safe, secure life without purpose. And remember, it's a fear gate, right? As all splenic gates are, all awareness centers, right? Every gate and the 3 awareness centers are fear gates, right? So 28's a fear gate, and it understands that the only way we're ever going to be free of fear is through purpose, through living for something more, right? And because 28's in the quarter of duality, right? Purpose fulfilled through relationship, it says, I can only find that purpose through love with another, right? And it can accept that sometimes love is a struggle, right? It's part of the channel of struggle. But maybe it even turns love into a struggle unwittingly, right? And individuals do that, they love the drama, of romance. They love the unrequited, they love the obstacles, right? But 28 may not know what it would be without a struggle. It doesn't recognize an easy, effortless love. That just doesn't even compute for it. Again, just pining for what it can't have. It's more exciting to have obstacles in the way, right? To have struggles that might keep you from your romantic union, right? Individuals can be dramatic about love. And surely, there's correct times for struggles and fights. And sometimes it's in that or in the aftermath of the struggle and the fight that you really see what love is really there, right? But the thing is that there's a fear of death in the 28, a fear of a life lived without purpose. So if romantic love becomes the purpose, and then that love goes away, life then feels purposeless, right? And for the not self, this is where romance and sadness becomes depression and suicide. It's the Romeo and Juliet thing of, if I can't have you, there's no purpose. Life isn't worth living. That's the dark side. The higher truth is really about empowerment through love and coming together without losing your individuality, without succumbing to fear, without making the other the purpose of your life. Love can be your purpose, right? Capital L. But love for a specific person as your purpose is a real risk, right? Because one day they won't be with you, right? Everything has to end. So to kind of just summarize this mirror relationship, 28's asking, what gives life purpose? I got to find a purpose. The answer can be the creative potential found in the 55. The answer can be love, right? They're both romantic and looking for the spirit of love to give life purpose and meaning. 55 needs to learn that when it falls into sadness, it can work with that state of being and transmute the sadness into something meaningful and purposeful, which is what 28 wants. And it's a dynamic between these two that can look for love as its purpose, but needs to realize that your purpose is always in you. You are your purpose, right? It comes from surrender to the form, right? Safety in the body. That's a splenic journey there. Feeling safe in the body, right? Really fully inhabiting your body, right? Surrender to the form, right? That's where the purpose is, not in someone or something external that can be taken away. So let's look at the not-self themes and wisdom potential here. So a 39 without 55 could be looking to fill its own spirit, right? With food, drug, etc. Especially if they don't have a defined solar plexus, right? And they feel the need to protect themselves from that emotional overwhelm, right? And the wise 39 knows how to cope either with its own emotions, if it has emotional definition, or to be present and centered with others' emotions if they're undefined emotionally, right? And it knows how to provoke in a way that empowers rather than crushes the other spirit, right? And it learns through these acts of teasing and provocation who's correct or not for it. 55 without 39 tries to provoke the other, right? Thinking that that's its job, but typically without success. And I've really seen that just be annoying, because they're not designed to pull it off, right? They're a very, annoying kind of gadfly sort of personality, potentially, right? And they may provoke the other in order to provoke themselves, to try to come out of their own melancholy, by getting a reaction. And the distorted and dysfunctional 55 tends to have an eating disorder, right? Most 55s have to work through that at some point in their life, in the world as it is, the not self world as it is, right? It tries to fill its spirit by filling its belly, right? Or by turning to substance to numb the difficult feelings, right? That's the distortion. So let's look at the incarnation crosses involved here. So last time we looked at the juxtaposition cross of fates, right, and the left angle cross of industry. And from that left angle cross of industry, the page turns to the right angle cross of the sleeping phoenix. Right, and this is obviously a hugely important cross because it's the cross of the next global cycle we're moving into. Right? And this cross is the only incarnation cross that will be transformed by the mutation itself. Ra says that our description of this cross won't apply to children born post 2027. And when the sleeping phoenix awakens, it's going to transform how our sexuality operates because we have the sexual role gate 59 here in this cross. And it will transform how we love each other, as 55 is the love gate. So sleeping phoenixes are busily seeking sex, love, and romance, right? That busyness comes from the channel of charisma, the 3420, right? It's a manifesting generator channel, right? And when it doesn't find love, it can suffer from love sickness. And it can try to fill its spirit with food and drugs and anything that can help them cope with their low spirit. And Ra says it's a joke because this is the cross that's going to kill sexual love, kill it in the sense that somehow human sexuality is going to change with the mutation. So people in this cross can feel like their energy is either on or off. Remember, we've got the pulse element going on here, right? And the phoenix is ultimately a life about resurrection, right? When their spirit's low, their life force energy can be dampened. It can appear like they've lost their vitality, right? But, like a phoenix, they can emerge from the ashes, and their life force can be resurrected. I've been close to phoenixes before, and I've very much seen this. I've very much seen them downtrodden and sort of out of touch with their vitality or just soaring, At the worst, they can be overly self-conscious, right? That's the shadow of gate 20, right? Not merely conscious of yourself in the moment, as in awake and watching yourself behave, right? But this hindering self-consciousness, right? No longer present in the now, instead disconnected from the body, living in their mind. And they can be rash and forceful and bullish with the power in the 34, just this indiscriminate display of power, reckless power, abusive power, aggressive, damaging, or in the binary, out of touch from their power, meek and weak, feeling like a victim of life and of their own dark emotions, right? In the 55. And they can avoid love and intimacy and union with others, The 59 there is looking at the 6. They could avoid love and intimacy by trying to merely survive through unsatisfying busyness, right? That's the trap of the 3420 in this context, is busy surviving. Is it satisfying? No. They've just got a bunch of balls in the air. They're running around like a chicken with their head cut off. They're not empowered and they're not satisfied. They're just treading water, surviving, right? And that eventually is going to lead to some sort of a crash, right? The higher expression here is being present with that gate 20, in the midst of their busyness, right? Busyness is not an excuse for lacking that sort of presence, right? And they allow their sacral to allocate power, right? And then the sacral will do so as is appropriate for the situation. And they can process and be with and release the intense emotions they feel in the 55. They can transmute difficult emotions with a creative release. And then their mere presence, their aura itself, can foster powerful union with others, with the 59. The result is an incredibly charismatic and busy, creative person that can touch others deeply, with this really powerful capacity to break down barriers and create union. And again, that union can be romantic and sexual or just co-creative, right? So let's look at the next cross, the juxtaposition cross of moods. As always, juxtaposition crosses are 4-1 profiles, with their fixed fate. Fixed fate means this very fixed, narrow trajectory they're on. Picture them walking a tightrope through life. They can't go 1 inch off on either side. These are the least flexible people in the world. So the busyness that we had in the Sleeping Phoenix is gone in this cross because we no longer have the 3420. Right? In its place, we have the 9th gate is the design sun, providing this sacral energy to work on detail, right? And the design earth in the 16th gate in the throat, which is all about skills and enthusiastic expression and the ability to identify with one's work and talent. So what we have here is someone deeply fixed in their moods, right? So just imagine, if they're really that gate 16, which is always looking to identify, it's like, can I identify with this work, with this pattern, right? Logical channel, right? Can I identify with this talent? It's looking to identify. So if it gets overly identified with a down wave, with melancholy, first off, they're going to be externalizing that mood, that melancholy with others, right? Which is going to be off-putting, right? And they can really get lost in it. The mental identification can really keep them stuck there. So this is a cross that's individual as well as logical and tribal, right? It has a deep need to know the truth. And Ross says in the not-self, they actually even look like they're carrying a cross on their shoulders, and friends in their network, who they're going to meet as a 4th line, are going to notice and try to unburden them, but usually unsuccessfully in the not-self world. But the potential of this cross is that these are people that can be very creative and very talented, right? There's so much creativity here in the 55 and the 59 and the 16. Those are all creative gates, right? And there's talent in the 16 as it's part of the channel of talent, right? And then they can engage with their creative process in this focused, detail-oriented way, right, with gate 9. So let's look at the left angle cross of spirit. This has the same gates as the juxtaposition cross of moods, right, as they always do, this transition from juxtaposition to the left angle, right? So now that we're in the left angle, we're talking about 5th and 6th line personality profiles, right? And again, gate 59 brings a capacity for union with the other, a capacity which can fill the spirit of the 55 or not, right? The capacity for that union depends on the relationship people on this cross have with their melancholy in 55, right? And the fear of intimacy in the 6 that's across from the 59. So at their worst, they can feel like victims of life, right? 55 can be victimy, right? Woe is me, goes to such dark places. And then they can run from intimacy or seek the wrong intimacies, right? And just blame others for their difficulties, right? And all of that's going to hamper the skill in gate 16, right? The victim mentality is going to really undermine the enthusiastic skillfulness that's there. Whereas the higher expression would be knowing that they need to find love within to find love without, right? Finding inner love is really what transforms the spirit, right? It's what allows them to have that deep, intimate union with the other in a loving way. Right? And their life can be filled with the creative spirit, passion, right? Passion in the 55, the focus in the 9, the talented skills in the 16, all working together to accomplish great works of art, right? Or to deeply connect with others and awaken their spirit and capacity for creativity. So as I mentioned when looking at, I think it was the polarity, it's interesting to note that the 6 lines of this cross are looking at the next gates in the wheel, which again are gate 40 and 37, right? So the 6-line personality version of this cross of spirit realizes that the spirit it seeks is actually in community, right? The spirit it seeks is in community. It's in communion with others, right? And that makes sense because, humans for, since time began, have been looking for the spirit with each other, right? 3740 is really this channel of religion, right? It's a certain way of finding spirit with each other in a more structured way, bound by rules and principles and so on and so forth. But there are people, that are coming together throughout the world looking to share, or tap into mystical truths together, right? And that's it's a unique capacity that the 1949 especially has, right? Channel of synthesis, a design of sensitivity. These are people, particularly people with hanging gates there, okay? When you have hanging gates in the mystical circuit, that makes you much more interested in mystical things than when you just have a channel, right? Because we take our definition for granted, right? But if you have a hanging gate there, as I do, I have hanging 49, it can make you very interested in the question of how we find spirit together, right? And what is the qualities of the interpersonal field, right? 1949 hanging gates there, their orientation to mysticism is we're going to find spirit together, right? We're going to find spirit interpersonally, right? And if we're sufficiently aware and sensitive with each other, we can really track subtle qualities of how we're relating and whether we're in touch or not. Are we connected or not? Are we connected to God? What does it mean to be connected to God? Is it possible to be disconnected from God? Right? It sees the interconnection of all things. And it can start to become aware of how its actions, right, affect the interconnection of what it's in proximity to, right? When I show up like this, how does that affect my tribe? How does that affect my community? Right? It can become wise about relationship and how to orient to relationship, not only to each other, but to God. Right? And in the context of this cross with gate 59, these are people who, they know that spirit is together, but then they have this ability to really break down the barrier, right? To find that intimate spirit, right, of the community. Okay, questions and comments about anything we've covered today or your transit experience? Hmm.
I'll share, not to be the only person that's sharing today, but I'm conscious of that in my open throat. Yeah, so I really related to a lot of what you said, filling up the spirit with food or alcohol.
Hmm.
And that sort of cheerleader vibe of the 55 as well. Like, I have a sort of a different perspective now, but in the past I've always been like, any reason to celebrate life, it doesn't matter. It's a great
Hmm.
reason to celebrate. And if I'm sort of not feeling like, if I'm feeling sort of underwhelmed about life, it's like there is no reason not to go out and make yourself feel better by any means, basically,
Hmm.
which has destructive qualities to it, right?
Yeah.
So sort of maturing through that process has been
Hmm.
really helpful. I
Hmm.
mean, I've got I definitely feel that moodiness and that fickleness as well. But I mean, I have the 6 and the 12. So I'm sure that
Hmm.
plays into it as well. And I've noticed how empowering it feels when um, in knowing that it's important to honor that. Um,
Hmm.
you mentioned, I put little notes in the chat and then they disappeared because I forget things, but something about you were talking about the crosses with the pulse element, and like how, because it was the right angle cross, or the phoenix, sleeping phoenix, where it's this. Basically, I just wanted to confirm that the pulse that you talked about is an individual thing, but is it because the sun is in an individual gate, or is it because the 3420, so there's a lot of individual circuitry in that particular cross? Or like, when do we sort of take that pulse into account as you
Right. Yeah,
described?
it's the whole thing, right? It's really the whole thing. The 3420, the integration is a subset of the knowing circuit, and then you have 55 in the knowing circuit. So it's all pulse oriented. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. Anyone else?
I realized that I'm hung up mentally on the distinction you were making, that it's about like team spirit, or as opposed to like a spirit. I don't know. It helped me to kind of hear that fleshed out a little bit more, because I definitely notice in myself that I'm very celebratory, but it feels like there's a spiritual component when I'm in celebration. I don't know if that's just specific for me and I'm not
Yeah,
needing to
that's
pull it apart.
that's specific to you. Yeah. There doesn't, for the 55, there doesn't need to be any type of spiritual, or we could say mystical component. It's not a mystical gate. And so how you fill your spirit, you just remember what you're here to potentially respond to are things that fill your spirit or not. It just happens to be that way for you, you know. But it's very much about the spirit of an energy, right? That happens between people for celebration, for holiday, for shared cause, etc. That kind of a thing, right? Yeah. And so you'll see usually 55s, it's one side or the other. I've met some that are really grumpy and grinchy, although maybe something excites them. And some are as I think Nicola said, like just looking for an excuse, to celebrate, and to lift their spirits. Right. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. I think the other examples that I'm trying to grok is I have two people in my life who have the 3955, so seeing it from that perspective too, I think. So anyway, it's something to sit with more, because those two people also, anyway, something
Well,
to continue to think about. Yeah.
remember, I mean, if you isolate elements and try to draw too much from those, it can be misleading, right? It's always about, as I don't know if I said this already or not, but like in this class, like it makes so much sense for people to go, oh, I have this gate. Well, am I not supposed to do this or am I supposed to do that? But it's not, we're not doing holistic analysis for anyone, right? We're looking at the gates in the abstract, right? And so, whatever you're looking at in the people that right, that's a whole bunch of things, right, that we're not necessarily covering here. But it's just 55 itself is not spiritual, right? It's not spiritual, right? It's a different type of use of the word. So, yeah.
Hey, James.
Hey.
Hey, I might have spaced out when you got more into this, and I'll be listening to this class again, of course, but like, did you go into a little bit of how the sleeping phoenix will experience a transition?
Yeah, I mean, well, I touched on the fact that it does resurrect. Did you have a specific question around that process?
Um, I have two sleeping phoenix brothers, and I'm curious about what this transition could look like for them.
I
Um,
can't speak to that. I mean, I think that would be kind of like a deeper analysis type of thing. You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
And I think that, what I have seen is sometimes the resurrection actually happens, the death and the resurrection happens around cycle shifts, right? There'll be some level of death and resurrection around Saturn return, Uranus, Chiron. Between Chiron and Uranus opposition is actually the Saturn opposition, right? So at that point, you're kind of halfway through the next Saturn return, and it's not one of the big defining moments from an HD perspective, but it's a tough one, also. And so I've seen that one be a moment for, I have a very specific sleeping phoenix in mind, actually. But yeah, I think that the cycle shifts can really help. And like what it looks like on the other side, I mean, there's no guarantee. I mean, there's no guarantee they're going to resurrect. I mean, I don't say that to be cynical, but it's just like, that's just life. And exactly what they are letting go of and how they got in that situation and what it's going to look like on the other side. We could point to things if we had their charts, but yeah, that's probably the best we could do. So,
Okay, gotcha. Thanks.
yeah, you're welcome. Anyone else? Oh, pockets. Yep.
Hi.
Hi.
I don't have a question, but just like a comment or um I haven't really noticed 55 much this transit. I guess it's just started though. But my what I usually notice with 55 in the transit is with my kid who's emotionally defined.
Mm,
When 55 comes through, it's like this extreme fickleness with food and
mm,
picking out what to eat or having an appetite at all is like a struggle.
yeah.
And when they were younger, it used to be a real problem for us. But I didn't like know human design then, but now like I can see it and look back and like, oh, it's just this is fine. This is it. What are you in the mood to eat? Let's go by that instead of trying to figure out a normal thing we usually do and that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
just what I've noticed.
Yeah, it's a food gate. Yeah, it's a food gate, so that would make a lot of sense. Fickleness with food definitely does show up here. Fickleness with love, both of those things. And then obviously potentially an unhealthy relationship with food, spirit, all that stuff. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
I wonder if I have something that I'm wondering is 55.
Hmm.
So I went on that date. It went well. We ended up spending the weekend together. Yesterday, he sent me some voice notes just gushing. And I have 8 fifth lines. I'm a little paranoid about extremely positive projections, but it's like almost that like rah rah, like spirited kind of gushing maybe. And it triggered my avoidance side. I'm feeling fickle now.
Hmm.
I don't know if that part of that is 55 playing with us.
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously, you filled his spirit, and yeah, I would be cautious. I have 8 fifth lines as well. I mean, I'm a fifth line personality, on top of that, but yeah, I would be cautious, with that many fifth lines. And you're a 3-5, right, Jess?
Right, right.
Yeah. With all of that, I mean, it's like what I say is chances are pretty high if I have a first date, the other person's going to be feeling really good about it. But it's just a first date, you know what I mean? Because there's such a projection field, they're going to see what they want to see. You've really got to give it time. So I think you just have to wait and see. Maybe something you're hearing doesn't track with how you understand yourself, right? But that's a complicated inquiry because they could be seeing something very legitimate in you that you have disowned, right? Some aspect of what does make you great, and your legitimate potential. Or, I usually can see as a fifth line personality when that person's concept of me is just doesn't hold water, right? They're making me into something that I'm not, and that makes me uncomfortable. And then I do, usually step back from those relationships. But yeah, I think it's something you just have to kind of see how that plays out. Gushing doesn't really like particularly strike me as a 55 thing, but I think the fact that 55 is here, it's romance, right? It's definitely romance, and romance is infatuated and it crushes and it's got its fantasies and all that kind of stuff. So something in that is happening, probably informing his experience. In addition to you possibly coming across as the perfect woman with all the fifth lines, So.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. I can
Yep.
see that.
Yeah. Anyone else? Any final thoughts before we wrap up? Okay. Well, thank you all. And thanks for your flexibility today. Sometimes I might have to do this again while I'm in Philadelphia. There's other things I need to kind of, whatever, work around. But yeah, thank you. And I look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. Bye for now.
Thank you.